The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday evening, the kind of rain that makes you want to get home as fast as possible. David's windshield wipers were working overtime, squeaking back and forth as he drove down the highway. In the back seat, his two kids were arguing about something silly. The way kids do when they're tired and hungry. "Dad, Sophie keeps touching my side of the seat," his 7-year-old son complained. "I am not. He's lying," his 10-year-old daughter shot back. David sighed. It had been a long day. His shift at the construction site had run late, and then he'd had to rush to pick up Sophie from soccer practice. Now all he wanted was to get home, heat up some left-toasted chicken from yesterday, and maybe watch half an hour of TV before the kids needed baths and bedtime stories. That's when he saw the car on the side of the road. It was a silver sedan, pulled over on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking like a desperate cry for help. The rain was getting heavier, and David could barely make out the shape of someone sitting in the driver's seat. For a split second, he thought about just driving past. He was tired. The kids were cranky. Dinner was waiting, but he couldn't do it. His own father had always stopped to help people. David remembered being a kid himself, sitting in the back of his dad's old truck, watching him help strangers change tires or jumpstart dead batteries. "We help people when they need it," his father used to say. "Because someday, you might be the one who needs help." David pulled over about 20 feet ahead of the stranded car and turned on his hazards. "Stay in the truck," he told the kids firmly. "Lock the doors. I'll be right back." He grabbed his old baseball cap from the dashboard and pulled it on, though it didn't do much against the rain. Within seconds of stepping out, he was soaked. He jogged back toward the silver car, his work boots splashing through puddles. As he got closer, he could see an older woman in the driver's seat. She looked to be in her 60s, with short gray hair and glasses. She was holding her phone up, clearly trying to get a signal. When she saw David approaching, she looked startled, maybe even scared. He couldn't blame her. A strange man approaching on a dark, rainy highway wasn't exactly comforting. David stopped a few feet from her window and held up his hands in a friendly way, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. He pointed to her hood and made a gesture, asking if she needed help. The woman hesitated for a moment, then rolled down her window about halfway. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, her voice shaky. "My car just stopped. It started making this terrible noise, and then smoke came out from under the hood. And I don't know what to do. My phone keeps losing signal." "No bother at all," David said, raising his voice over the rain. "Mind if I take a look?" The woman nodded gratefully and popped the hood. David walked around to the front of the car and lifted the hood, propping it open. Even in the dim light and pouring rain, he could see the problem right away. One of the radiator hoses had burst, and coolant was everywhere. This car wasn't going anywhere without a tow truck and a repair shop. He walked back to the woman's window. "Ma'am, your radiator hose is blown. You're not going to be able to drive this anywhere tonight." The woman's face fell. "Oh no. I was visiting a friend at the hospital in the city, and I'm trying to get home. I live about 30 minutes from here." David glanced back at his truck, where he could see Sophie and his son pressing their faces against the window, watching him. He thought about dinner getting cold. He thought about the long day and how tired he was. Then he thought about his father. "Look," he said, "I can give you a ride, either to your home or to wherever you need to go. It's not safe for you to sit here in this weather." The woman looked uncertain. "I couldn't possibly impose. You have children with you." "That's okay. They're good kids." "Well, most of the time," David added with a small smile. "Really, I insist. You can't stay here." The woman studied his face for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. Finally, she nodded. "That would be incredibly kind. Thank you. My name is Helen, by the way." "David," he replied. "Let me pull my truck up closer, so you don't have to walk far in the rain." A few minutes later, Helen was settled in the front passenger seat of David's truck, her purse clutched on her lap. She was damp from the short walk between vehicles and she apologized repeatedly for the trouble. "It's no trouble," David assured her as he pulled back onto the highway. "Really?" Sophie leaned forward from the back seat. "Are you okay, ma'am?" "Dad always stops to help people." Helen turned to look at the little girl and smiled warmly. "I'm okay now, thanks to your dad." "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sophie." "I just had soccer practice. We won our scrimmage 3-2, and I scored one of the goals." "That's wonderful," Helen said, and she sounded like she genuinely meant it. David's son chimed in, not wanting to be left out. "I'm learning division in school. It's really hard." "Division is tricky," Helen agreed. "But I bet you're doing great." As they drove, Helen gave David directions to her house. It was in the next town over, about 25 minutes away. Helen asked the kids about school, their favorite subjects, what they liked to do for fun. She had a gentle way about her that put everyone at ease. "Do you have grandkids?" Sophie asked suddenly, in that direct way kids have. Helen's smile faltered just a bit. "No, I don't. But I was a teacher for many years, so I got to spend time with lots of children." "What did you teach?" David asked, trying to fill the brief moment of sadness he'd sensed. "Third grade, mostly. English and reading. I just retired 2 years ago." They continued talking, the rain still drumming on the roof of the truck. Helen mentioned that she'd been visiting a friend at the hospital, someone who was very sick. David could hear the worry in her voice when she talked about it. Finally, they pulled up to Helen's house. It was a small, tidy place, with a neat lawn and flower boxes in the windows. Even in the rain and darkness, you could tell someone took care of it. "I can't thank you enough," Helen said as she gathered her purse. "Please, let me at least pay you for the gas." "Absolutely not," David said firmly. "I'm just glad I could help." Helen looked like she wanted to argue, but then she thought better of it. "Well, at least let me get your name and phone number so I can properly thank you. Maybe send you a card or something." David didn't see any harm in it. He pulled out one of his business cards from the construction company where he worked and handed it to her. It had his name, phone number, and the company address. Helen took the card and studied it for a moment, holding it close to her glasses in the dim light. Something flickered across her face, an expression David couldn't quite read. Surprise? Maybe? Or recognition? But then, it was gone, and she was smiling again. "Thank you again, David. You're a good man. Your children are lucky to have you." She got out of the truck and hurried through the rain to her front door. David waited until he saw her get inside safely and turn on a light before he pulled away. "Dad, that was nice of you," Sophie said from the back seat. "Just doing what anyone should do, kiddo," David replied. As they drove home, David had no idea that the simple act of stopping to help a stranger would change everything. He didn't know that Helen was sitting in her house at that very moment, staring at his business card with tears running down her face. He didn't know that she was looking at the birth date listed under his commercial driver's license information, her hands shaking. He just drove home through the rain, thinking about reheating chicken and getting the kids to bed at a reasonable hour, completely unaware that his life was about to become extraordinary. The next morning, David woke up to his alarm like always. 6 o'clock. Same as every weekday. He dragged himself out of bed, made coffee, and started the usual routine of getting 2 kids ready for school. Breakfast, backpacks, lunch boxes, the constant reminders to brush teeth and find missing shoes. By the time he dropped them off and headed to the construction site, the whole thing with the stranded woman had become just another memory. A good deed done, nothing more. He had plenty of other things to think about. The project they were working on was behind schedule. His boss was stressed, and there was talk of mandatory overtime this week. David spent the day hauling materials, measuring boards, and working alongside his crew. It was hard physical work, but he didn't mind. It paid the bills, and there was something satisfying about building things with your own hands. Around lunchtime, he sat on a stack of lumber with his sandwich and checked his phone, a few text messages from his sister asking about the weekend. A reminder about Sophie's parent-teacher conference next week, and a notification that his water bill was due. Nothing unusual. Just life moving forward like it always did. What David didn't know was that across town, Helen hadn't slept much the night before. After he'd dropped her off, she'd sat at her kitchen table for hours, holding his business card, looking at it over and over again. She'd made phone calls, sent emails, dug through old boxes in her closet that she hadn't opened in years. By morning, she'd made a decision. A decision that would change everything. 3 days went by. David fell back into his regular rhythm. Work, pick up the kids, dinner, homework, help, bedtime. On Thursday evening, he took his son to the library for a school project. On Friday, Sophie had another soccer game. They lost this time, but she didn't seem too upset about it. Saturday morning, David was planning to sleep in a little. Maybe till 7 instead of 6. But his phone rang at 8:30, waking him up from a dream he couldn't quite remember. He grabbed the phone from his nightstand, squinting at the screen. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Probably a spam call about his car's extended warranty or something. But something made him pick up. Hello? Is this David Reynolds? A woman's voice. Professional and polite. Yeah, that's me. Who's this? My name is Jennifer Caldwell. I'm an attorney here in town. I'm calling because I represent someone you recently helped. A woman named Helen Holloway? David sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. An attorney? His mind started racing. Had something happened? Was Helen okay? Had there been some kind of accident after he dropped her off? Or worse, was she claiming he'd done something wrong? Is she all right? David asked, his voice tight with worry. Oh yes, she's perfectly fine, Jennifer said quickly, as if she could hear the panic in his voice. I apologize for startling you. This isn't about anything negative at all. Actually, Helen was very moved by your kindness the other night, and she'd like to meet with you again. Along with me, to discuss something important. David's confusion only grew. I don't understand. Meet about what? I'm afraid I can't discuss the details over the phone, but I can assure you, it's nothing bad. It's actually something quite significant. And Helen feels it's important to talk to you in person. Would you be available to come to my office? Perhaps this coming Tuesday morning? David rubbed his face, trying to make sense of this. Can you at least give me some idea of what this is about? You're being pretty mysterious here. Jennifer paused. I understand your hesitation. Let me just say this. Helen has discovered some information that directly concerns you and your family history. She wants to share it with you properly, face to face, with legal documentation present. It's sensitive and personal. Family history? David's adoptive parents had both passed away 5 years ago. Within months of each other. His dad had a heart attack, and his mom just seemed to give up after that. Dying quietly in her sleep. He missed them every single day. But what could Helen possibly know about his family? Mr. Reynolds, I know this must sound strange, Jennifer continued. But I promise you, this is legitimate. Helen is a kind woman who's been through a lot, and she simply wants to talk to you. Would Tuesday at 10 in the morning work? David thought about it. He'd have to call in late to work, which his boss wouldn't love. But the curiosity was eating at him already, and if Helen had gone through the trouble of hiring a lawyer just to set up a meeting, it had to be something real. Okay, he finally said. Tuesday at 10. Can you text me the address? Of course. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I think you'll find this meeting very worthwhile. After she hung up, David sat there in bed for a long time, staring at his phone. The kids were still asleep. The house was quiet. His mind was spinning with possibilities, each one stranger than the last. He decided to call his sister, Beth. She was the only family he had left now, and she was usually good at talking him through things. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up, sounding groggy. Do you know what time it is? She mumbled. Beth, something weird just happened. That woke her up. For the next 20 minutes, David told her everything. About helping Helen on the highway, about the phone call from the lawyer, about the mysterious meeting on Tuesday. Beth was silent for a moment after he finished. Then she said, "Okay, this is either really good or really weird. Maybe both." "That's helpful," David said dryly. "I'm serious. What if she's, like, a secret millionaire or something, and she wants to reward you for helping her? That would be amazing, right? You could finally fix your truck, maybe take the kids on a real vacation." "Beth, that's ridiculous. People don't just give away money to strangers." "But she hired a lawyer, David. That costs money." "And what did the lawyer say? Something about family history? What if Helen knew Mom and Dad somehow? What if she has information about them?" David hadn't thought of that. His parents had been private people, especially about the years before they adopted him. He'd always known he was adopted. They'd never hidden it from him, but they hadn't talked about it much either. Said it didn't matter, that he was their son and that was all that counted. "I don't know, Beth. The whole thing feels strange." "Well, you're going to the meeting, right?" "Yeah, I guess I am." "Good. And call me right after. I want to know everything." The rest of the weekend crawled by. David tried to focus on normal things, taking the kids to the park, doing laundry, grocery shopping. But his mind kept drifting back to Tuesday morning. What could Helen possibly want to tell him? On Sunday night, after the kids were in bed, David found himself looking through old photo albums, pictures of his parents, of him growing up, of birthdays and holidays and ordinary moments. His mom's smile, his dad's laugh, the way they'd loved him completely, never once making him feel like he was anything other than their son. He traced his finger over a photo from his 8th birthday. His dad had built him a treehouse that year, spent weeks working on it in the backyard. David remembered helping, holding the nails, learning how to use a level. That treehouse was probably where he'd first fallen in love with construction work. Whatever Helen wanted to tell him on Tuesday, he hoped it wouldn't change how he remembered his parents. They were gone. But their love was still the foundation of everything he was. Monday at work was torture. David couldn't focus. He measured the same board 3 times and still got it wrong. His buddy Rick noticed and asked if everything was okay. "Just distracted," David said. "Got something on my mind." "Woman trouble?" Rick asked with a grin. "Something like that," David replied, though it couldn't have been further from the truth. That night, he barely slept. He kept checking the clock. Midnight. 2 in the morning. 4. When his alarm finally went off at 6, he felt like he hadn't slept at all. He got the kids ready, dropped them at school, and then drove to the address Jennifer had texted him. It was a small office building downtown, the kind with a coffee shop on the ground floor and professional offices above. He parked his truck and sat there for a minute, trying to calm his nerves. This was it. In a few minutes, he'd know what this was all about. David took a deep breath, got out of the truck, and walked toward the building entrance. He had no idea that his entire understanding of who he was, where he came from, and how the universe worked was about to be turned completely upside down. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt like it took forever. David watched the numbers light up, one after another, his stomach doing flips. When the doors finally opened, he stepped out into a quiet hallway with cream-colored walls and dark carpet, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and copy paper. He found Suite 304 and stood outside the door for a moment. The sign read, "Jennifer Caldwell, Attorney at Law," in simple gold letters. David wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans, took a breath, and knocked. "Come in," a voice called from inside. David opened the door and stepped into a small reception area. A woman in her 40s, dressed in a navy suit, stood up from behind a desk and smiled warmly at him. "Mr. Reynolds? I'm Jennifer. Thank you so much for coming." She extended her hand, and David shook it. Her grip was firm and professional. "Please, come into my office. Helen is already here." David followed her through another door into a larger room with big windows overlooking the street below. And there, sitting in one of two chairs, facing Jennifer's desk, was Helen. She stood up when she saw him, and David could see her hands were shaking. "David," she said softly, "thank you for coming. I know this must all seem very strange." "That's putting it mildly," David said, trying to keep his tone light even though his heart was hammering in his chest. "But I'm here. So maybe someone can tell me what's going on." Jennifer gestured to the empty chair next to Helen. "Please, sit down. This is going to take a few minutes to explain, and I want you to be comfortable." David sat, very aware of Helen beside him. She kept glancing at him, then looking away, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. It was making him more nervous by the second. Jennifer settled into her own chair and folded her hands on the desk. "Mr. Reynolds, what I'm about to tell you is going to come as a shock. I want you to know that everything we're sharing with you today has been verified through official channels and documentation. Helen came to me because she wanted to make sure this was handled properly and legally." "Okay," David said slowly. "You're kind of freaking me out here." "And," Helen spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper, "your birth date was listed on there, along with other information from your driver's license. And I recognized the date. Remendery 2. Remendery 2. David's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? You recognized it?" Helen's eyes filled with tears. 28 years ago, I gave birth to a baby boy. On March 15th. At Mercy General Hospital. And I gave him up for adoption. March, the words hung in the air like smoke. David stared at her, not quite processing what she'd just said. His birth date was March 15th. He was born at Mercy General. He was 28 years old. "Wait," he said, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I think you're my son," Helen said, and tears started rolling down her cheeks. "I've been looking for you for so long, and then you stopped to help me on that highway, and I didn't know. I had no idea. But then I saw your information, and the pieces all fit together." David felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. He gripped the arms of the chair, trying to steady himself. "This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. That's impossible," he said. "I mean, lots of people were born on that day, at that hospital. It's just a coincidence." Jennifer opened a folder on her desk. "I thought the same thing at first," she said gently. "That's why I advised Helen to let me investigate further before contacting you. I reached out to the adoption agency that handled your case. With Helen's consent as the birth mother, and with your adoption being finalized years ago, they were able to confirm certain details." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. David picked it up with trembling hands. It was an official-looking document with the state seal at the top. His eyes scanned the words, but they weren't making sense. Birth mother. Closed adoption. Case number. And there, his adopted parents' names. Robert and Carol Reynolds. "This doesn't prove anything," David said, but his voice was weak. "Lots of people could have the same birthday and the same hospital." Helen reached into her purse and pulled out an old envelope, yellowed with age. "Before I gave you up, the adoption agency let me write you a letter. They said it would be kept in your file, and if you ever came looking for me, they'd give it to you. I never thought I'd be the one showing it to you." She handed him the envelope. David took it, noticing how carefully she'd written his name on the front. Except it wasn't David. It was, "To my baby boy." End quote. "To my baby boy." "I don't know if I can read this," David whispered. "You don't have to," Helen said quickly. "Not right now. But there's something else. In the letter, I described a birthmark you had. A small one on your left shoulder blade, shaped kind of like a comma. I noticed it when they let me hold you after you were born. I mentioned it in the letter because I thought if you ever found me, it would be a way to know for sure. David's hand automatically went to his left shoulder, touching the spot where he knew, without even thinking about it, that small birthmark was. He'd had it his whole life. Never thought anything of it. The room started to spin a little. Jennifer must have noticed because she quickly poured a glass of water from a pitcher on her desk and handed it to him. "Take your time," she said. "This is a lot to process." David drank the water, buying himself a few seconds to think. His mind was racing through everything he knew about his own life. His parents had always been open about the adoption. They'd told him when he was young, in simple terms he could understand. "We wanted a baby so badly," his mother used to say. "And then we got you. And you were perfect." They'd offered to help him find his birth parents if he ever wanted to. But David never had. It felt disloyal somehow. Like he was saying they weren't enough. And they were enough. They were everything. "Did you ever try to find me?" David asked Helen, his voice rough. "Before now, I mean," Helen nodded, wiping at her tears. "I registered with every reunion database I could find. I hired a private investigator once. But the adoption was closed. And there were laws protecting your privacy. I could never get past the red tape. I've thought about you every single day for 28 years. Every birthday. Every holiday. I wondered where you were. If you were happy. If you were safe. Why did you give me up?" The question came out before David could stop it. And he immediately felt bad for asking. But he needed to know. Helen's face crumpled. "I was 19 years old. Unmarried. My parents were very strict. Very religious. When they found out I was pregnant, they were furious. They said I'd brought shame on the family. Your father, he was my boyfriend at the time. He wanted to keep you. But his family had money. And my family didn't. And his parents threatened legal action. Said they'd make sure I never saw you anyway, if we tried to raise you together." She paused, gathering herself. "I was scared and alone, and I didn't know what to do. The adoption agency told me you'd go to a good home. To parents who desperately wanted a child. They said you'd have opportunities I couldn't give you. So I made the hardest decision of my life. And I've regretted it every day since." David sat back in his chair, overwhelmed. Part of him wanted to be angry. Angry that she'd given him away. Angry that his whole life he'd never known where he came from. But another part of him understood. She'd been young and scared and pressured. And she'd been right. He'd had a good life with his parents. They'd loved him fiercely. "What happened to my father?" David asked. "My birth father, I mean." Helen's face grew sad. "He died 6 years ago. Car accident. We'd lost touch over the years. But I found out through mutual friends. He never married. Never had other children. I think losing you broke something in him." The room was quiet for a moment. David looked down at the envelope in his hands. At the letter he hadn't read yet. Then he looked at Helen. Really looked at her. He could see it now. Something about the shape of her eyes, the way her mouth curved. Things he'd never noticed before, but now seemed obvious. "I don't know what to do with this," David said honestly. "I don't know how to feel." "You don't have to know," Jennifer said. "This is your choice, Mr. Reynolds. Helen wanted to tell you the truth, to give you the information and the documentation. But what happens next is entirely up to you. No one is asking you to make any decisions today." Helen leaned forward. "David, I'm not trying to replace your parents. I know they raised you and loved you, and I'm grateful to them for that. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know the truth. And to tell you that helping me that night on the highway, it felt like a miracle. Like the universe was giving me one more chance." David stood up suddenly. He needed air. He needed space to think. "I need some time," he said. "This is too much." "Of course," Helen said, standing too. "Take all the time you need. Jennifer has my contact information. if you ever want to reach out. And if you don't, I understand that too. David nodded, still clutching the letter. He shook Jennifer's hand automatically, then looked at Helen one more time. She was crying again, but trying to smile through the tears. "Thank you for stopping that night," she said. "Even if you never want to see me again. Thank you for that kindness." David didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded and walked out of the office, down the hallway, into the elevator. When the doors closed, he finally let out the breath he'd been holding. His hands were shaking as he looked down at the letter. Everything he thought he knew about his life had just changed, and he had no idea what to do next. David sat in his truck in the parking lot for almost an hour. He couldn't bring himself to turn the key. Couldn't make himself drive anywhere. The letter sat on the passenger seat next to him, still unopened. Every time he looked at it, his chest got tight. Finally, he picked up his phone and called Beth. She answered, on the first ring. "Well? What happened? You were supposed to call me right after." "Beth, I can't talk about this on the phone. Can you meet me somewhere? Like right now?" The worry in his voice must have gotten through to her because she didn't ask questions. "The diner on 5th Street. I'll be there in 20 minutes. David drove on autopilot, barely remembering the turns. When he walked into the diner, Beth was already in a booth in the back. She took one look at his face, and her expression changed from curiosity to concern. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." David slid into the booth across from her and just sat there for a moment. Then, slowly, he told her everything. About Helen being his birth mother. About the birthmark, the letter, the documentation. Beth's eyes got wider and wider as he talked. "Oh my God," she breathed when he finished. "David, this is insane. I was joking about the millionaire thing, but this is way bigger than that. I don't know what to do," David said, running his hands through his hair. "I keep thinking about Mom and Dad. What would they think about all this?" Beth reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "They'd want you to do whatever feels right for you. You know that. But what does feel right? I don't even know this woman. Yeah, she gave birth to me. But that doesn't make her my mother. Mom was my mother. Those things can both be true," Beth said gently. "Carol Reynolds was your mother. She raised you, loved you, was there for every scraped knee and bad dream. Nothing changes that. But Helen is also part of your story. Maybe she could be part of your life too, if you wanted." David shook his head. "I have enough to deal with. 2 kids, a full-time job, trying to keep everything together. I don't have room for this kind of complication." "Is it really about not having room? Or are you scared?" The question hit harder than David expected. He looked down at his coffee cup, watching the steam rise. "Maybe both," he admitted quietly. Over the next few days, David tried to go back to normal life. But normal didn't feel normal anymore. He'd catch himself staring off into space at work. His buddy Rick had to call his name 3 times before he responded. At home, Sophie asked him twice if he was feeling okay. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said. But she gave him a look that said she didn't believe him. The letter stayed in his truck, hidden in the glove compartment. He couldn't bring himself to read it, but he couldn't throw it away either. On Thursday night, after putting the kids to bed, David found himself pulling out old photo albums again. There was one picture he kept coming back to. He was maybe 5 years old, sitting on his dad's shoulders at some kind of fair or festival. His mom was beside them, laughing at something. They all looked so happy. He remembered that day, sort of. The details were fuzzy, but he remembered the feeling of being safe, of being loved, of being exactly where he belonged. But now, there was this other part of his story, a part he'd never known about. A woman who'd thought about him every day for 28 years. A woman who'd given him up because she felt like she had no other choice. David pulled out his phone and stared at the contact information Jennifer had texted him. Helen's number was right there. All he had to do was call. His finger hovered over the screen for a long moment. Then, he put the phone down. Not yet. Saturday morning, David took the kids to the park like he did most weekends. It was a beautiful day, sunny and warm. Sophie ran straight for the swings while his son headed to the jungle gym. David sat on a bench, watching them play. And that's when he finally pulled out the letter. His hands were shaking as he opened the envelope. The paper inside was thin and delicate, like it might crumble if he handled it too roughly. The handwriting was neat but emotional, with some words smudged like tears had fallen on them while she was writing. "To my baby boy," it began. David took a deep breath and kept reading. "I'm writing this letter just hours after saying goodbye to you, and my heart is shattered into a million pieces. I held you for 20 minutes before they took you away. 20 minutes to memorize your face, your tiny fingers, that little birthmark on your shoulder that looks like a comma. 20 minutes to tell you everything I needed you to know. I want you to know that I love you. I will always love you, even though we're being separated. This isn't what I wanted. If the world were different, if I were stronger, if circumstances were different, I would keep you and raise you and be the mother you deserve. But I'm 19 years old with no money, no support, and no way to give you the life you should have. The people at the adoption agency tell me you're going to a wonderful family. Parents who have been waiting years for a child. Parents who will love you and give you everything I can't. I hope that's true. I hope with everything in me that you have a beautiful life full of love and happiness. I hope you learn to ride a bike and that someone teaches you to swim. I hope you have birthday parties with cake and presents. I hope you fall in love someday and that someone loves you back just as much. I hope you find work that makes you proud. I hope you laugh every single day. And I hope that someday, maybe when you're grown, you might want to know where you came from. If that day comes, I'll be here. I'll be waiting. I'll want to hear about every moment of your life that I missed. I'm so sorry I couldn't keep you. Please don't think it's because you weren't wanted. You were wanted so much. You still are. You always will be. Your birth mother, Helen." David's vision was blurry by the time he finished reading. He wiped at his eyes quickly, not wanting the kids to see him crying at the park. But the tears kept coming anyway. All this time, he'd had a birth mother out there thinking about him, wondering about him, hoping he was okay. And he'd never even thought to look for her. He'd been content with the life he had, never realizing there was someone out there with a hole in her heart shaped exactly like him. "Dad, are you okay?" David looked up to see Sophie standing in front of him, her face worried. He quickly folded the letter and smiled, though he knew it probably looked forced. "Yeah, kiddo, I'm okay. Just thinking about some grown-up stuff." "Are you sad about Grandma and Grandpa again?" The question caught him off guard. He didn't realize she remembered them that well. She'd only been 5 when they died. "Kind of," he said, but also thinking about some other things. Sophie climbed onto the bench next to him and leaned against his side. "Grandpa used to say that thinking too hard gives you wrinkles." David laughed despite himself. "Yeah, he did say that, didn't he?" They sat together for a minute, watching David's son try to climb across the monkey bars. Then Sophie said, "Miss Kelly at school says, family is the people who love you. It doesn't matter if they're related to you or not." Miss Kelly sounds pretty smart. "She is. She's my favorite teacher." David looked down at his daughter, at her simple understanding of complicated things. Maybe she was onto something. Maybe family wasn't just about blood, or about who raised you. Maybe it could be bigger than that. That night, after the kids were asleep, David finally picked up his phone and pulled up Helen's contact information. He stared at it for a long time. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he typed out a text message. "Hi Helen, this is David. I read your letter. I'm not sure what happens next, but maybe we could talk sometime. If you still want to." He hit send before he could change his mind. Then he sat there, heart pounding, phone in his hand. 3 minutes later, his phone buzzed. A text from Helen. "I would love that more than anything. Thank you for reaching out. There's no pressure, no expectations. We can go at whatever pace feels right for you." Another message came through almost immediately. "I've been hoping to hear from you every day since our meeting, but I would have understood if you never wanted to contact me. Thank you for giving me this chance." "No," David typed back. "Maybe coffee sometime next week? I work most days, but I can probably take a lunch break." "That would be wonderful. Just tell me when and where." David set the phone down and let out a long breath. He didn't know if this was the right decision. He didn't know where it would lead or how it would change things. But sitting in that lawyer's office, looking at Helen's tears, reading her letter at the park, something had shifted inside him. His mom and dad had taught him to be kind, to help people, to do the right thing even when it was hard. Maybe the right thing now was to let Helen back into his life. Not as a replacement for the parents he'd lost, but as something new. Something neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. He thought about that rainy night on the highway when he'd pulled over to help a stranger. If he'd just driven past, none of this would have happened. His life would have stayed simple and uncomplicated. But maybe some complications were worth it. Maybe some stories were meant to come full circle, in ways you could never predict. David picked up the letter one more time and read the last line again. "Your birth mother, Helen." He folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Then he went to his bedroom and placed it in the drawer of his nightstand, right next to a photo of his mom and dad, both parts of his story, side by side. Finally together after all these years. The coffee shop was crowded on Wednesday afternoon, full of people on lunch breaks and students with laptops. David spotted Helen sitting at a corner table, nervously stirring a cup of tea. When she saw him, her whole face lit up, and then immediately she looked worried. Like she was afraid he might change his mind and leave. "Hi," David said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. Work ran long." No, it's fine. I'm just glad you came." Helen's hands were shaking slightly as she set down her spoon. "Can I get you something? Coffee? A sandwich? I'm okay. I only have about 45 minutes before I need to get back to the site." They sat in awkward silence for a moment. David had no idea how to start this conversation. What do you say to the person who gave birth to you, but you'd never met until a few weeks ago? Helen seemed to be having the same problem. "Finally," she said, "I've been thinking about what to say to you for days. I had this whole speech planned out. But now I can't remember any of it." David smiled a little. "That's okay. I'm not really good at speeches anyway. I read your letter," he continued. "The one from when I was born." Helen's eyes filled with tears immediately. "Oh." "It made me understand some things," David said carefully, "about why you made the choice you did. I guess I never really thought about it from your side before. I want you to know that I've never stopped thinking about you. Never stopped wondering. Every March 15th, I'd think about how old you were turning, what you might be doing. When you were 6, I wondered if you'd started school yet. When you were 16, I wondered if you were learning to drive. And when you turned 28 this year, I wondered if you had a family of your own." David nodded. "I do. 2 kids. Sophie's 10 and my son just turned 7. Helen's hand went to her mouth. "You have children?" "Oh my goodness. That means I'm a grandmother." The word hung between them, strange and new. David hadn't thought about it that way. His kids had lost their grandparents years ago. He'd thought that was it, that they'd never have grandparents again. "They're good kids," David said. "Sophie plays soccer and loves reading. My son is obsessed with dinosaurs and Lego. They drive me crazy sometimes, but I can't imagine life without them." "I bet you're a wonderful father," Helen said softly. "I try. My dad, the man who raised me, he taught me a lot. About being patient, about showing up, about loving your kids, even when they're being difficult." "I'm so glad you had good parents," Helen said, and she meant it. That's all I ever wanted for you. I need you to know that." There, they talked for the rest of David's lunch break. Helen told him about her life, about the years of teaching third grade, about the students she'd loved. She told him about his birth father, a man named Michael who'd wanted to keep him but whose family had pressured them to give him up. She told him how Michael had never gotten over it, how he'd carried that sadness his whole life. David told her about growing up, about his parents, about becoming a dad himself. It was strange, sharing his life with someone who should have been there but wasn't. But it also felt important, like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. When David had to leave for work, Helen walked him to his truck. "Would you want to do this again?" she asked hopefully. "Maybe next week?" "Yeah," David said. "I think I would." Over the next few months, they met regularly. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes for lunch, once for a walk in the park. The conversations got easier. David found himself looking forward to seeing her, to hearing her stories, to sharing his own. But he still hadn't told the kids about her. That felt like a bigger step, one he wasn't quite ready for. Beth finally called him out on it one Saturday, when she came over to watch the kids while he went to meet Helen. "You're being a coward," she said bluntly as David grabbed his keys. "Excuse me? The kids should know about her. They should meet her." "What are you waiting for?" David sighed. "I don't know how to explain it to them. They're still young. How do I tell them that the woman I've been meeting is my birth mother? What if they don't understand? What if it confuses them?" "Kids are tougher than you think," Beth said. "And Sophie already asked me who you've been spending so much time with. She thinks you have a girlfriend." David groaned. "Great. Just tell them the truth. They can handle it." That afternoon, David sat Helen down at the coffee shop and brought up the idea. He said, "Maybe it's time for you to meet Sophie and my son. If you want to, I mean." Helen's eyes went wide. "Really? Are you sure?" "I don't want to push." "I'm sure. I think they should know you." Helen started crying right there in the coffee shop, not even caring who saw. "I would love that more than anything." 2 weeks later, David took the kids to the same park where he'd read Helen's letter. He'd told them that morning that they were going to meet someone special, someone who was part of their family but they'd never met before. "Is it a cousin?" his son had asked excitedly. "Not exactly. I'll explain when we get there." Helen was waiting on a bench, wearing a nice dress and looking more nervous than David had ever seen her. When she saw them approaching, she stood up, her hands clasped together. "Kids, this is Helen," David said. "Helen is my birth mother. That means she's the person who gave birth to me before I was adopted by your grandparents." Sophie's eyes went wide. "So she's like another grandma?" "Rom." David looked at Helen, who had tears streaming down her face. "Yeah, kiddo. I guess she is." Sophie walked right up to Helen and said, "Hi, I'm Sophie. I play soccer, and I'm really good at math." Helen laughed through her tears. "It's so wonderful to meet you, Sophie. Your dad has told me so much about you." David's son was more shy, hiding a little behind David's leg. But when Helen pulled out a small toy dinosaur from her purse and said, "Your dad mentioned you like dinosaurs, so I brought you this," he warmed up quickly. They spent the afternoon at the park. Helen pushed the kids on the swings. She admired Sophie's soccer moves. She listened to David's son explain, in great detail, the difference between a Tyrannosaurus and an Allosaurus. And David watched it all, feeling something shift and settle inside his chest. This wasn't what he'd expected his life to look like. He'd thought his family tree was simple, straightforward. Parents who'd adopted him and loved him, kids he was raising on his own, a sister who had his back. That had seemed like enough. But now, there was Helen. And somehow, instead of making things more complicated, she made things feel more complete. Like a chapter of his story that had been missing was finally being written. As the sun started to set and they walked back to the parking lot, Sophie slipped her hand into Helen's. "Can we see you again?" she asked. Helen looked at David, who nodded. "I'd like that very much," Helen said. "Good," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "Because Grandma Carol used to make us cookies, and Dad isn't very good at baking. Maybe you could teach him." Everyone laughed, and David felt his heart swell with something he couldn't quite name. Gratitude. Maybe. Or hope. Or just love. In all its messy, complicated, beautiful forms. That night, after the kids were in bed, David stood in his living room, looking at the photos on the wall. His parents smiling on their wedding day, the kids as babies, him and Beth as children. And now, in his phone, new photos from today. Helen with Sophie, Helen with his son, Helen with all of them together. He thought about that rainy night on the highway, about the split-second decision to pull over and help a stranger. He'd had no idea that moment would lead here, that a simple act of kindness would unravel a mystery 28 years in the making, that helping someone with a broken-down car would somehow help heal a broken heart. His phone buzzed. A text from Helen. "Thank you for today, for letting me into your life, into your children's lives. I know I can never make up for the years we lost, but I promise I'll treasure every moment we have going forward." David smiled and typed back, "Thank you for never giving up on finding me. And for writing that letter. It helped more than you know." No. He set the phone down and walked to his bedroom. In his nightstand drawer, the letter still sat next to the photo of his parents. He picked up both, holding them carefully. "I hope you'd be okay with this," he whispered to the photo. "I hope you'd understand." And somehow, looking at their smiling faces, he knew they would be. They'd taught him to be kind, to help others, to love without conditions. They'd taught him that family was about more than blood. It was about showing up, about choosing each other, about love that didn't have limits. Helen was his birth mother. His parents were the ones who raised him. His kids were his world. Beth was his rock. And somehow, all of these people fit together, different pieces of the same beautiful puzzle. David put the letter and photo back in the drawer and turned off the light. Tomorrow he had work, the kids had school, life would continue in all its ordinary ways. But nothing felt quite as ordinary anymore. Sometimes the universe works in ways you can't predict or plan for. Sometimes a rainy highway and a broken-down car and 20 minutes of kindness can change everything. Sometimes the family you're meant to have finds you in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes, just sometimes, the simple act of stopping to help someone turns out to be the moment your whole life was leading up to all along.